So yeah, I did write this book, The Unpopular Truth about electricity and the future of energy. It just came out, a new version came out, the 2024 updated version came out. You can get that on our website, theunpopulartruth.com. And also I keep on the website, as you have here on the screen, a blog where I basically cover, every couple of weeks, some aspects here about gas or coal or electric vehicles. If you scroll down, you can see other topics being covered on solar panel manufacturing, on primary energy, on the cost of energy. So many of the aspects we discussed today are covered in this blog, and of course the details are all covered in the book. So the book is on Amazon available, and there's also other books that I have written, some on coal that you can find. So yeah, I hope that some of this discussion maybe prompts some of you to think about these things more detailed and follow up and read up on it. And every time you buy a book, I get one coffee, right? $4, so it's very good. Thank you.
Excellent.
As you said, I would call myself an energy economist, more by self-education, and I did study energy economics as well. But I've been active in the commodity space for about 20 years. Before that, I worked at the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, in the US and Germany. And so my day job is commodity trading. My night job is energy economics and understanding the difficulties and challenges around the so-called transition that we're currently embarking on.
So we first heard of you looking into Traderferg's research, and what do you think of all the parts you cover? What do you think was that started to give you more attention in recent years?
To be honest, it started, so when I started the job I'm in, commodity trading, and when I started to travel around the world, like when I'm in Bangladesh or in Pakistan, and you start to see how people are struggling with their day-to-day energy needs. I started to question, hold on, where are these hundreds of millions of people going to get the energy from? And so that started my interest actually in this entire discussion. And since then, I've embarked on a lot of fundamental economical understanding about how things work. I am biased. My job is primarily in coal and raw materials, and minerals and cement products. But of course, being in that field, which is largely challenged and pushed into a corner, of course, I've learned to understand what the problems are of the commodities I'm working with, and what the problems are of the solutions that are supposedly supposed to replace that.
Mm-hmm. And so, among your pretty broad coverage of the energy markets, I've seen you covered extensively also the renewable side, and we've seen that renewable energy companies have struggled in recent years. And how are things going to play out for the green industry and the green transition?
Well, yes, I've studied and spent a lot of time on wind and solar. I actually used to run a wind park myself. I was managing director of a wind park in Germany for 3 years. So my work was also in that area. And I've spent a lot of time understanding what wind and solar does and what it doesn't do. And there are fundamental issues with wind and solar which cannot be discussed away. And if you want to, I can run you through that logic. It's actually I've been trying to synthesize the problem, to the basics, and I've presented this on several occasions in Germany, in Asia, in Africa, worldwide. So if you want to, I can share that and we can have a quick discussion around that. Basically, the question really is, why is there a problem with wind and solar? Why there's even a discussion around the energy transition if wind and solar were the solution? Right? I mean, if it was a solution, then why are we discussing it? Right? I mean, it's obviously better. But the fact is, from my understanding, is that wind and solar are an inferior technology. And because they're inferior, they cannot be cheap. Even though we are supposedly told they're cheap, and we're told they're cheap because the cost metric they're using to evaluate how cheap they are is called levelized cost of electricity, LCOE, which does not cover the entire cost. It's like a marginal cost measure in a way. And the first problem actually is energy density. So energy density of wind and solar is very limited, and that's by nature given because there's only so much energy per square meter available to us from the sun or from the wind. And we have to then basically put infrastructure up to collect that energy. That's so-called green, renewable. Actually, it is renewable energy. It is green energy. The energy that we're collecting in itself, in its source, is actually a renewable, right? And because of energy density, we have these large, hundreds of square kilometers, full of equipment we have to put in place. That's one issue. For instance, here is one of the modern solar park in the UAE just put in place, 1.35 cents per kilowatt hour, supposedly 160,000 households being covered, 21 square kilometers, and reducing 2.5 million tons of CO2. Well, it's actually not correct. You see, the 1.35 is not the cost, that's the price. That's how much they price the kilowatt hour that they generate. But that's not the cost of the electricity to the people, and I'll explain that. Secondly, it doesn't cover 160,000 households because no household can run on solar. You need to have, electricity at night and when there's a sandstorm and, when there's something else, right? So obviously it doesn't work on its own. There's something else required. And actually the CO2 reduction makes wrong assumptions about solar being zero CO2, which is not the case. So that's energy density is one key problem which we actually cannot change because it's given by nature. The second problem is the operational lifetime. So these so-called renewable equipments, they don't last very long. So modern solar panels probably last only 12 to 15 years. I'm talking grid scale, new solar panels from China. They last 10, 12, maybe 15 years if you're lucky. Then they have to be replaced because they're so optimized, they're so thin to make them cheap. When you look at wind turbines, especially the offshore ones, you need to replace, the power infrastructure every 8 years, and they're being repowered after 10, 12, 15 years. So in fact, there's very few large-scale, grid-scale wind parks that really last 20 years. It's not the case. Of course, there are windmills which last longer, but on average, modern, large-scale equipment doesn't last that long. And then you have the batteries for storage. How long do they last? I don't know, 10 years? I don't know. So the whole operational lifetime is a problem because you have to replace the entire system every few years, right? You have the energy density issue. You have to build a lot. That lot you have to replace every few years. And then, of course, comes the third thing, and that's really the third basic problem, it's the intermittency. The intermittency is also something that you cannot change. It's nature-driven. So here's solar in this case, and you see, let's say, it's a demand curve. And the logic, of course, is that you would generate power during the day and then use that power at night, right? Carsten, that's the logic, isn't it? Yeah. So you move it over here. So you think you overbuild 2 times. That's it, done. Well, the best locations in the world have a natural capacity factor of 25%. South Africa, Australia, California, maybe 28% if you're lucky. That means that on average over the year, the sun only shines 25% in a useful way. Because of mornings and evenings, there is sometimes rain, there is sometimes other issues. So that means you have to overbuild 4 times, assuming you move electricity from day to night. Well, in order to move it, you have, actually Germany, by the way, has a natural capacity of 10%. In the Northern Hemisphere has 10%. China, maybe 10, 12%. The very south of the, also doesn't have much. And that already would mean you would have to overbuild 10 times in those, very strong energy-hungry countries. And now you need some sort of storage to move it from day to night. If you use batteries, you probably have a 20% loss, energy loss. If you use hydrogen, you have up to 80% energy loss. So now in order to move electricity from day to night, you would have to now overbuild 12 times to 50 times already. But now think ahead. So far what we've done, we've just generated enough electricity on average for the year to move from day to night. But what if there's 2 or 3 or 5 days or 10 days of no sun? For 10 days storage, you would have to overbuild 100 to 500 times. And this is the problem of intermittency, which cannot easily be overcome. And that means you have to have a whole system in addition to the wind or the solar installation to make the electricity to generate usable, right? And in fact, there's 5 systems to replace one coal or gas-fired power station. One, you have to have solar and wind in a drastic overbuild, which we just discussed. Second, you have to have short duration storage, mostly batteries, to overcome the short-term fluctuations and to keep the system stable. But the short duration batteries storage not enough. You need long duration storage, which batteries cannot be. So you have to use hydrogen for that. So you have to have a third system in addition to the 1 and 2 for long duration storage. And then in fact, you still have to have a fourth system, usually thermal power plants, which is based on hydrogen, by the way, right? Supposedly hydrogen power plants, now gas. Or today you have coal-fired power stations as backup, and China uses backup coal. So you have this 4 security thermal power plants. And the fifth one is the transmission of the grids and the infrastructure. So you're replacing an existing system with 5 systems, so-called clean. When you see those 5 systems we're building up to replace one coal or gas-fired power station, now you understand why it cannot be cheaper. You understand also why there are other issues that come with it. There's a huge environmental issue. There's a huge issue for plant life and animal life because of these large infrastructure. The raw material input. There's the energy input. You need a lot of energy to build all this infrastructure. And this is when you come to this metric called energy return of investment, EROI, when you now calculate the entire energy required to build these 5 systems, which need to be replaced every few years. You quickly realize that the energy you get out is hardly sufficient to make up the energy you put in. So the EROI is very low. So actually you're starving the world of energy if you were to go large scale, grid scale, huge, like as we are planning, as Germany has been doing already. If you're going wind and solar, you're literally starving yourself of energy.
So can this industry, I mean, can it even survive without subsidies?
Of course, there's no way. You see, when you understand this energy economic basics, right? It's the energy density, the short operational lifetime, and the intermittency. To overcome these things, what you have to put. There is no way, what I say, to earn honest money. Because you have an inferior technology, which is trying to replace a superior technology, which is coal or gas, in this case mostly, right? You're trying to replace that, and you cannot. That means you will actually not be able to earn honest money without someone else paying. Subsidizing at the source, at the generation stage, or at whatever stage. Or subsidizing the power plants, the backup, or the transmission, right? Because if a solar or wind generator would have to pay herself or himself for these 5 systems, of course, it wouldn't make money. So the investor also cannot make honest money. And you're seeing it around the world, right? You're seeing wind and solar companies going bankrupt. There's many reasons, geopolitical reasons, also China. There's many reasons. But the fundamental reason is what I just explained.
How do you see this ending? I mean, we've covered quite well the inferior economics of the renewables. We know we are in a difficult economic situation in the Western world, and I mean, how is this going to play out? Are we at the end of a failing power system?
Has a huge implication for the energy and raw material needs. So of course, one thing is that we're literally at the beginning of a mining super cycle. Because of this inefficiency, of this infrastructure inefficiency we're adding, we are logically requiring a lot more resources that we didn't need before, right? In addition to what we had before. And that is one thing. Yeah. Just to give you a sense that this is how silicon is made for solar panels. You have temperatures of over 1,000 degrees. This is silicon, polysilicon coming out of this hot bath. And then it's cut into these slices. Yeah. And of course, a lot of garbage, a lot of trash being created with all of this. And this is a purity of 99.11 nines of silicon. So to reach this purity, You need to have a huge energy input as well. So actually, the second consequence is we have a large raw material demand increase of new different things we didn't need before. We also have additional energy demand, which we didn't need before. We're wasting energy of building all this stuff. That means the energy requirement actually will go up relatively. This is the second thing, right? Of course, China is benefiting the most. So we talked about the raw material requirement. We talked about the energy requirement. The one who's benefiting the most is China currently, because China controls the processing of raw materials, like silicon, manganese, chrome, nickel. Nickel is largely now in Indonesia. I mean, China has a large monopoly, but control over this market, right? Now, that's something. The next thing that will happen is the impact on the disposal. Because of these large equipments we're putting up, we are disposing of this every few years. There's a huge new disposing industry creating, right? To dismantle things, build things, of course, trying to recycle it, right now, minimally is recycled. Practically, it's just being thrown away. Right now, we have a new circular economy. We're mining in Africa. We're shipping to China. We're processing there. Once it's done, we're giving it to Europe and the US to build up and to run the windmills there or the solar panels. After 15 years, we throw it back to Africa. That's the new circular economy. So that's how it's currently happening. So there's an environmental impact also on plant life and biodiversity and animal life because of this large infrastructure. And then the third thing, which I think you were getting at, is energy poverty. We are starving ourselves of energy if you continue this way. And you can already see in Germany alone, I'm not kidding, the German auditor, government auditor, earlier in the year reported that energy poverty increased from 15 to 25% in Germany from 2021 to 23. That means in Germany, every fourth household is considered energy poor, as per the government auditor, officially in writing. And of course, they calculate the energy poverty by depending on how much you spend for energy versus other things, right? And what you do and what you have to give up. So energy poverty is the logical conclusion. And the energy poverty has, of course, a human aspect and has an industrial aspect. This is deindustrialization, which you also see in Germany, right? And which is a perfect example. So Germany, in a way, my own home country, is the perfect poster child to see what is happening. Energy costs go through the roof. Energy poverty goes up, deindustrialization because the industries cannot afford the energy, they're going somewhere else where it's cheaper, right? You're not helping the environment, right? You need a lot of new things you didn't need to import before, like equipment, all those things comes from China, so huge dependency on China. So you see all these things in Germany.
So you're saying that the renewables, they are economically inferior and it's not sustainable. We are creating energy poor population and energy poor industry. And what makes you think that this is going to go on and create a new super cycle in the mining? Why it's not going to break down and people are just simply going to revert to traditional sources like nuclear or coal? Why is this not just gonna?
So look, I mean, look, you're right. The right thing to do would actually be two things. One, you would want to invest in R&D to find a truly long-term sustainable solution for the energy problem. That's what you have to do. And two, until you have this solution, you have to invest in your existing infrastructure, which is coal, gas, oil, nuclear, geothermal, hydro, whatever, all those things to make it better and cleaner, more efficient. The reason why I say there will be a new super cycle, because the amount of money now at play already. This so-called renewable energy transition industry is not $1 billion industry, it's not $1 trillion industry. This is how much money is every year spent on this, trillions of dollars, largely government funded or people funded, and that money needs to be spent. So when you look at the amount of solar panels being produced and windmills being produced and installed, that's not going to stop because of what I say. So there's still too much money, and it will take some time to get over this. So there will be this cycle, right? But of course, this will not or cannot sustain itself. I don't see that being possible. At the same time, the world still has a relatively low penetration of wind and solar on average. Germany does not. but on average, you have a relatively low penetration of wind and solar. That means you can still do a lot of damage without really doing too much damage in a way, right? So let's say if you go to South Africa, has very little wind and solar right now, or Indonesia, right? So there you could spend a lot of money on this, which actually doesn't do any good, but there's a lot of money to be spent on it without causing too much damage to the economy, right? In Germany, you've caused the damage already, which is only difficult to undo unless you really change energy policy as one of the issues, right? And there's other countries also have problems. So, but I think there is still room, without causing too much industrial damage to certain countries, and still put a lot of that inefficient, inferior technology into place. There's so much money to be spent on this, which I don't see that stopping anytime soon.
Are you involved in any way in this renewable super cycle? Are you playing it in any way?
Absolutely, we are moving copper products. We're moving lithium products. We're moving chrome products. Absolutely, in our company. Yeah.
Which market appears more attractive at this point?
It's China. China's buying everything. I mean, when China controls 80-90% of the entire solar supply chain, that means 80-90% of raw materials go to China for that.
So
and the entire energy to process these raw materials comes from where? From coal.
And so recently we've seen talk about the fact that we cannot trust supply chains anymore, and you just discussed the fact that China has a really concentrated role in the manufacturing, the processing part of the renewable industry. I mean, how does that add up? Is that going to stay that way, or are we going to see changes?
Look, geopolitically, the shift from the Western world to the Eastern world has been happening for a long time. But the so-called energy transitioning is actually accelerating that shift. Because you see what I just explained before, you see how China and India are expanding their coal power, also expanding their solar power. But in the end, China and India are using basically coal as backup. While Germany says, no, you can't use coal, you have to use gas as backup for solar and wind. That's not true. You can also use coal very nicely, as China and India are showing. So there is no question that this anti-energy transition discussion is benefiting primarily China right now. And it's certainly costing primarily the West, Europe, and North America, primarily. But of course, there's many more. So that shift is accelerated by the so-called transition. That means other dependencies, like in the past, we were dependent, from gas from Russia, and now we're dependent from solar panels from China. I mean, it's a different kind of dependency, right? It's still a dependency.
We know that another part of the power system that is underinvested, that's the infrastructure part, transmission grids and so on. Is that a part of the picture that you have looked into? That's
absolutely. And again, so take a step back. So I consider myself more a macroeconomist, like a macro energy economist in a way, right? So I think at the big scale things. And so we talked about generation or source of energy, which is wind, solar, coal, gas, nuclear. These are sources, right? Now, any infrastructure you build to make that energy available to the consumer, there's something in the middle that has to happen, right? And that's what you just saw. Part of that is transmission and all those things. But these things don't actually are sources of energy, right? They are actually costing energy. They're costing energy to build, they're costing energy to run. So this is a source, and I explained that the source, we're actually starving ourselves of energy. I explained that. Now, on top of that starved source of energy, we're now putting huge new infrastructure, additional infrastructure on top, which also requires energy. And we're building EVs, electric vehicles, which is not a source of energy, it's a consumer of energy. We're replacing an oil-based product, direct primary energy in form from oil went into my gas tank. Now we're replacing that with electricity, basically, right? It means we're moving, from oil to electricity. That's from electricity is supposed to come from this. Now we know the EV master in the world is China, and where does the power come from in China? From coal. Right? So I mean, and that's why China's strategy is very interesting, because they are basically replacing imported oil with domestic coal. Perfect. At the same time, they're taking over a global auto business, right? Which was a German, Japanese, American business, and now China is the leader of EVs. Already overtook Tesla. So they're not only themselves becoming less import dependent on oil products, using more of their natural coal resources domestically, but at the same time, because of the way they're supporting this industry, they are becoming a leader in a large global automotive business.
Do you think China's role, its majority, its rise to its current position, do you think is sustainable in the car industry? Will they continue to dominate and expand on their existing position?
Look, I mean, I've recently written some articles on my blog on electric vehicles, about the history of electric vehicles and the current status of electric vehicles. And I do not see an easy way for Western manufacturers to compete with China. Because you see, to build electric vehicle is much simpler than to build an industrial combustion engine vehicle. Basically, what you need a computer, you design, you need an engine, right? And you need a battery, right? That's what you need to build an electric vehicle. Nothing too complicated. And all of these things China has and controls.
Because one of the things we are following is the fact that the exports, the car exports from China, they have been very strong in recent years, and so you're basically saying that this is a trend that will continue and possibly even strengthen.
Absolutely, there will be ups and downs. Like currently, there's huge overcapacity in production. There's less demand for EVs currently. Right, this year has been a very bad year for EVs. Germany, I think they went down 50%. I forgot what the number was, demand in the first half of the year. So there's big adjustment because people start to see there's other issues with electric vehicles. But in terms of the damage to the car industry has already partially been done, right? And electric vehicles do have a role to play in the future mobility. I totally believe that, because they do basically they change emissions from a city to outside a city, right? So actually you keep cities cleaner, which is, I think, a good thing. And that makes sense for certain application. Makes sense to have electric vehicles. Just don't pretend that the electric vehicle revolution will save the environment or the climate. It will not. It cannot, because of everything else you need. But this is such a welcome thing for China. If you think about it, China has committed to be CO2 neutral 20 years after the West.
So the Western world is just going to stand by and watch as they lose a core industry.
Well, that's now we go into politics and even bigger things in a way, because the next consequence is, if what I'm saying is correct, and maybe I'm wrong, possibly, hopefully, maybe I'm wrong. I don't think so, but who knows, right? Then logical consequence will be social conflict in the West, right? Because as an industrial nation gets weaker and poorer for many reasons, that will cause social conflict. And that social conflict will result into political conflict, unfortunately, often between the right wing and the left wing, right? And the sides become more extreme. As they become more extreme, the issue becomes bigger and problematic. What we need to solve this problem is actually for people to come together, to see the problem, come together and say, listen, guys, this is not left or right. This is the basis of our existence, right? And we should all be together to make our society strong and resilient, right? But what I fear is quite the opposite. That basically we are creating more extreme left and right wing, and the left tends to be green, which is actually the problem. It's not the left the problem. The green is the problem. So-called green. Actually, green is not either the problem. It's not green the problem. Wind and solar is the problem, to be honest. It's not green being the problem. Wind and solar is a problem, right? So and in a way that, of course, you see more and more people moving towards the right. You already see that in Europe, right? In all those countries. So yes, I am foreseeing big shifts. I'm foreseeing conflicts, and at some point things will turn around. I believe that in the West and also Germany will come back strong, but it will be a lot of harm and damage in between. That's my current assessment.
So we've seen some huge natural gas spikes in Europe after the war and after COVID. Do you see new spikes coming in Europe?
Right now, the spikes are being avoided because of reduced demand, like deindustrialization. Right? But how far can that go? I don't know. I see large volatility coming back into the market, large volatility, which includes spikes. This large 22 spikes, of course, were made much worse by the Ukraine-Russian conflict, obviously, right? Which was hopefully a one-time event. But it was not caused by that, because the spikes happened before in 21, if you remember. In 21 already the prices went through the roof, right? So it's not only Russia. Russia had a big impact on that. But the fundamental reason is this wind and solar problem. And that shortage will mean, when there are strong winters in the Northern Hemisphere in Europe, the lights are going to turn off. And before they turn off, you're going to buy everything you can to somehow keep the lights on. You're going to buy coal, you're going to buy gas, which we have seen the coal, how the coal went up in 22, 23, right? Now it's down again. Now, all you can hope is that you have the power plants to combust the coal and gas. Because if they have been dismantled by that time, as they're planned to be dismantled, like they have dismantled nuclear in Germany, then there's a problem, because it doesn't matter how much raw materials you get in, you cannot combust that. So that means the lights will turn off, literally. Which causes, again, more conflict.
What kind of opportunities do you see on the LNG and natural gas side at this point?
So I also recently wrote something more detailed on coal and gas together, because coal and gas is basically combustion-based electricity. There's a few other things as well. It's also heat, right? It's also industrial heat and all the other things. But 60% of global electricity comes from coal and gas, 60%. 25% from gas, 35% from coal. Gas on average is more expensive than coal, but it looks cleaner, and actually it does burn cleaner and faster. Gas has been hailed as the bridge towards the transition. So basically there's many nations say, okay, we're going to go away from coal, we're going to go towards gas because it's supposedly cleaner. The facts are, for the climate, it's not better because of methane. So if you are concerned about the climate, then LNG is actually mostly worse than coal because of methane. But that's not the belief that people have. And so gas, I think, has a bright future for the next decades. There is no question for me. The gas industry is now, however, also struggling with the same what the coal industry is struggling with, right? This green push and the climate push. And they have a methane issue to deal with, because the CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour of gas is half that of coal, roughly. But the LNG push has basically made gas more transportable. Oops, that's interesting. I put my thing up. The LNG push has made gas more transportable, more flexible in a way. Large infrastructure requirements, terminals, all those things, right? Vessels to transport the stuff, repowering terminals, all those things. And so the demand, I think, is going to grow nicely. At the same time, you already see quite large LNG projects coming online in the next 2 to 3 years. I think next year is going to be a bit tight, but I think in 2 or 3 years, it's going to be maybe even oversupply of LNG, because there's too much investment. Because you can also see that many Asian nations realize, holy shit, oh my God, I was dependent on LNG in 22, 23. Europe bought all of this, and I had no LNG. We had blackouts in Bangladesh and Pakistan because they couldn't get LNG. They couldn't afford the LNG. So they were going back to coal now, because coal is always cheaper than gas, always. And in a way, it's even more secure, because think about it. So that there are power plants in Europe and in the US that are switching from coal to gas to save the climate. But what does it mean, switch from coal to gas? Basically, a coal power plant has 4 months of supply in its backyard. 4 months of energy security in its backyard. A gas-fired power station doesn't have that. They have a pipeline. They pray every morning that the gas comes through the pipeline. You see, the energy security aspect is a very big one. And when you speak to CEOs who used to run coal and now run gas, they will tell you about that. But there's issues with coal, of course, also issue with gas. Either way, I foresee a bright future for gas. I also foresee a brighter future for coal than people think, right? Because people think coal is dead, but it's far from dead, right? We had another record year last year. We're going to have another record year this year. We're going to be 9 billion tons of coal being produced and consumed worldwide. And the IEA is predicting a coal plateau and then decline as of end of decade. I don't know, but it's a lot of coal being burned and required globally, right? And you see that the Asian nations continue to increase their capacity for the right reason, because it's the cheapest, it's the most secure, and in many ways it's even more sustainable than LNG. And they realize wind and solar is not sustainable on its own. They still put it up because they're given money by the West, but they realize in the end, it's coal and gas, and give me whatever nuclear you can give me. Indonesia, last week or 2 weeks ago, for the first time in its history, has now given the go-ahead for nuclear. Right.
So you're saying that we could be looking at an overcapacity of LNG going further into the decade?
I do see that, but I mean, I haven't studied enough of the demand supply side going forward. Generally, there will always be waves like overcapacity, undercapacity, but generally, I think I see a bright future, because the power demand, the energy demand for the world is so much more, and that has to be, met. And when people think that increased energy demand will be met by wind and solar, then they're dreaming. But we're not investing enough in coal and gas, nor nuclear, to meet that additional demand. And when you don't invest enough, that means what? Shortages. That means high prices, right? So that's just the fundamental macroeconomic sort of logic, but of course, very volatile, right? There will be tough years, there will be good years, but on average, it will be very good.
So let's follow a bit up on the coal side, and where do you see the best investment case at this point, on the met side or on the thermal?
Oh, I mean, look, I mean, met coal is sort of sexier than thermal coal. Thermal coal is much bigger, of course. Thermal coal is lacking investment. Met coal is also lacking investment, but maybe less so than thermal. And thermal is cheaper than met coal. So of course, I generally, as an investor, would invest counter-cyclical, right, in things that are really short, right? So that is sort of my gut feeling. But you can invest in both, and both need money. So I would do as well both, yeah? And I am invested in both. I'm also invested in fusion. I'm also invested in other things, right? So I think as an investor, once you understand that there's literally no honest way to make money in wind and solar, which also means there's no honest money to make in hydrogen, logically, because hydrogen comes from wind and solar. Otherwise, you wouldn't have hydrogen, right? There would be no discussion about hydrogen for storage if it wasn't for wind and solar, right? And if that's the case, then you have the same problem for the entire renewable chain. There's no honest money in it, but there is money in it. If you know how to navigate and get it from the right place, someone will pay. But the honest money is in the conventional power, right? Coal, gas, nuclear. Hydro, if you have it, but hydro is limited by the rivers. Geothermal, if you have it, right now it's it's very small, but it's going to grow. That's where the money is, and that's where insufficient investments are. So at a macro scale, that's where you invest and make the money.
And if you look a bit broader on the commodity side, tell us a bit how have you been involved in the last years, and how it's been performing.
So, I mean, the commodity space remains a very interesting one. And the energy and commodity space, actually, in terms of valuation, when you look, again, macro, when you look at the total equity valuation of the world, and then you consider the commodity and energy valuation of the world, that spread has never been as big now. Basically, either this is overvalued, this is undervalued, or both, right? So I think that is, at least historically, and there have been these cycles that they have before over in 10, 20-year cycles, whatever. So we're now at I don't know if we're an all-time highest spread, but we're at a very, very high spread. So that for me shows that still commodities and energy is undervalued. And you can argue this is also overvalued, but who knows? I mean, yeah, this whole tech bubble and all those things. But I think there is a macro game as investor to put more money into commodities and energy compared to other equities.
Any particular favorites at this point in the commodity space?
No, I mean, again, I don't see myself I don't play investor, so I'm spending most of my time in our own business basically, and the energy economic side of things. I mean, I have a few investments here and there and certain funds that play what I just said, that logic, right? That logic of investing more in energy commodities versus equities relatively, right? And there are funds available in Switzerland. There are funds that do this kind of thing. So I think it's possible to find different opportunities, but I wouldn't be able to name any. I apologize.
I think you mentioned in the beginning that you also follow construction materials, cement, and people who follow the dry bulk space, they will of course think that this is really essential to that part of shipping in China and so on. And what do you see happening on that side?
So when it comes to the shipping side, iron ore is probably the biggest, coal is the second, right? And then it comes the other products, right? There's probably wheat and agriculture products. So I think the cement space in terms of the bulk shipping is probably not that big, but it is, I think many tens of millions of tons worldwide, right? I mean, there are cement companies who play that cement game, yeah, but the construction, I mean, the cement is just one part of construction. The other part is the steel, right? Steel and cement in a way often go together. And as the world continues to grow in the East, in India, in China, in Southeast Asia, and all these places, you're going to have a lot of the demand. And India is a perfect example. I mean, how they are continuing to increase their cement capacity. And then Africa comes after, right? Right now, Africa, we talk about a long time for Africa. At some point, Africa will come. There's no question about it. When, I don't know, but it's partially coming already, but it will come. Yeah, and that's a whole new game in terms of those construction materials to invest in. Right?
So another thesis we've been following at our platform is related to platinum and palladium, and we already discussed the car industry, and as anyone who follows the car industry knows that platinum and palladium are used in catalysts, and so the question is, do you still see a usage case for those metals, even if everybody's talking about the transition to electric vehicles and so on?
Of course, especially. I mean, the PGMs are absolutely one of that area from this mining super cycle I talked in the beginning of, that they're part of it. I mean, you can even see gold prices where they are, right? I mean, that's a whole different story. Of course, gold is a whole different world, but I think the precious metal requirement for all this technology we're building, not only energy related or transition related, but also other things, is going to increase. And generally, I have the sense that the Western world doesn't want to, make their hands dirty anymore. So they want to sort of, have someone else take care of this. So I think there is opportunities everywhere. And that's, by the way, also where opportunity is not only to make money, also to actually make a genuine difference in terms of sustainability. Because when you invest in these kind of processes, which are generally dirty processes, when you invest in these, you're going to invest in the end, you're going to improve efficiencies, because investments basically think you make money by being more efficient, more productive. More efficient, more productive means actually you're cleaner by nature, right? If you increase the efficiency of a power plant by 1%, right, that's 3% less raw material requirement, 3% less emissions. So these investments are actually not only making money, they're also the right thing to do for the environment, because you're improving efficiencies, energy efficiencies, raw material efficiencies. Right?
So moving a bit back to what you said about Europe and Germany, I mean, it sounded a bit grim and doesn't look very promising in the short and medium term from what you're saying. And so the obvious question is this, remember the crisis a decade ago back in Europe, the sovereign debt crisis, the unstable markets and so on. I mean, is this even time to be in the markets given the backdrop we're seeing?
like everywhere, right? I mean, first of all, I mean, again, when you speak to the macro investment guys, they probably have different views. Some people say no, it's fine, it cannot get much worse. Some say, you know, it's there's opportunities. I think that also Europe there's opportunities. There are companies which are not active in Europe; they're active outside of Europe, right? And also within Europe, there's still a big market, right? I mean, Germany alone is still, despite the troubles, it's still bigger than I think 10 nations around it. Yeah? So I mean, that's how big Germany is, despite, you know, all these things, and it's still bigger than it was 20 years ago. So there's a lot of opportunity also in Europe, but generally, I'm definitely relatively in terms of, you know, let's say China, India versus Europe. Of course, I see a macro disparity, right? And it will be painful. But all these, I always think, whenever painful times come, that's also actually the time when you are smart and not smart, not lucky, a little bit lucky to pick the right things. That's actually even the best way to create value. Unfortunately.
As my final point here, I've written down Bergbau, and this is the company, a commodity company, listed in Germany, in which you are involved. Maybe you can take us a bit through that company before we finish up this interview.
Yes. Yeah, unfortunately, the screen sharing doesn't work. But so HMS Bergbau is a commodity trading company that's majority controlled by our family. My father created a company about 30 years ago. We listed already a long time ago, and we are very active in the coal trading space. The family also has certain investments in certain assets. And the company is expanding into lithium and other products. We have a big project in Kazakhstan. We are expanding into copper and other products. So it's a family-run business. You know, my father's been in business for 50 years. I now joined 20 years ago. Very, very passionate about the business, and it's a German company, German-listed company. So we keep up with all the German regulations and rules. And of course, I believe it's undervalued completely, right? So no, but I mean, we have a lot of things coming up. We're also expanding into fuel products, so oil products. So there's a lot of things we are developing and hoping for in the next decades. This is going to be a long-term business.
I mean, what are the primary reasons that investors should look into Bergbau at this point?
Look, I mean, it's a growing company. I think it was one of the top 100 growing companies in Germany. I think they won an award. They're active in the commodity space. They're European, but the main market is Africa and Asia and America. So they're not exposed to the European risk, right? Because their business is not in Europe, or very, very small. Yeah. But they're still European, and they're still keeping, you know, the European mindset about doing this business. Yeah? So I think, and that is, I mean, when you're an investor looking at this stage, to allocate a certain portion to a company like this, I think is the right thing to do, because you know, those companies, I mean, there's not many of those in Europe, to be honest.
Excellent. That sums up what I had prepared for today, Lars. It was a pleasure to sit down with you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to speak to you, and yeah, look forward to hear more from you.